short session. Let's start. And I am the chair, Thomas Poggi. I'm supposed to make a few introductory remarks, which I will do, and then I will turn it over to my co-chair, Luis Cabrera. So the opening remarks are, we are supposed to talk about cosmopolitan citizenship, and I wanted to remind you of something that you all already know, which is nepotism and the attitude that we have to nepotism. So one thing that, if you think about it, is very surprising is that in the history of humankind, in all different cultures everywhere in the world, something has emerged, namely a prohibition against nepotism. Nepotism is the inclination to favor people of one's own family, one's own friends, one's own neighbors, in the execution of a public office. So you occupy a public role as a public official, maybe the director of a high school or the person awarding contracts for a government ministry, and you favor your friends, your relatives, your family members, your neighbors. That is nepotism and very strongly prescribed. Now, the interesting thing is that everybody accepts that loyalty to family is a very important value. We are supposed to be loyal to family, and we are also supposed to be loyal to our country. And so you would think that the expectation should be that people should weigh these two loyalties against each other and should give priority to the one at some time and priority to the other another time. You should sort of look, how much is at stake for my son, how much is at stake for the country, and then make a decision on that basis. But actually, the prohibition against nepotism is very strict, and it says that you give no weight at all to the interests of your near and dear when you are executing a public role. So if you're the director of a high school, you give no weight at all in deciding on the grades and recommendations for the kids that one of the children is your own daughter. Now that's a remarkable thing, a remarkable historical achievement, cultural achievement, that is obviously in part driven by the fact that countries that institute this principle are more successful in the competition among countries than countries that are not. Countries that are corrupt, as we call it, have nepotism still accepted or widely practiced, will not do as well in the competition. Now this anti-nepotism principle is one that we apply not only to officials, but even to ordinary citizens. So we would condemn a citizen who bases a decision about an important matter of public policy, justice, common good, on whether this is beneficial to the relatives and friends of that person or not. So for example, with affirmative action, if somebody said, I'm against affirmative action because my children are boys and white, that would be considered a very bad reason, a wrong reason to be against affirmative action. It's okay to be against affirmative action if you have good reasons against it, why it is unjust or why it is not demanded by justice. But you can't be against it. You're not supposed to be against it simply because your children happen to be white boys. Now, that spirit of anti-nepotism, which has taken root, at least as a matter of principle, if not always in practice, in many countries, is a principle that I think would be very promising to have on the global level as well. If our public officials at the global level could be anti-nepotistic about their own country, could forget which country they come from, and simply execute their office in the interest of justice and the common good worldwide. That doesn't happen yet. So you can see fierce struggles among states about who gets to occupy a certain office. The World Bank directorship, for example, everybody wants it. The Americans are fighting very, very hard that an American should be the head of the World Bank, and then the Europeans get the head of the IMF, and the Chinese get the head of WHO, and so on. Because everybody understands how these people, these office holders, will favor their own country as they execute this office. Now, what I think would be a great advance, a great step forward towards cosmopolitan citizenship would be if we changed that expectation. If we successfully instituted a public expectation that officials of international agencies have to forget, so to speak, the country they come from, just as officials within countries have to forget the province where they come from. Nobody cares in the United States where the president comes from. Nobody's worried that if the president comes from Texas, he's going to favor Texas or something. Doesn't happen. President doesn't do that, wouldn't do that, couldn't do that. But of course, with public officials internationally, that's widely practiced. Now, if we could achieve that, if we could have a strong expectation that public officials in international agencies must be very strictly impartial between the interests of all the countries, regardless of where they come from, then that expectation could be extended to us as citizens, and we could say, we too, as citizens, have to be impartial, not with regard to everything, but with regard to the rules of our global system. The rules have to be fair. We have to have a level playing field, as the expression goes, at the international level. And once we have a level playing field, then it's perfectly okay for the officials of one country and the citizens of one country to fight very hard to gain competitive advantage against others on the level playing field. But we all have a shared responsibility for the fairness and impartiality of the international system of rules. That would be the basic idea. And that would be my favorite way, the most realistic, most promising way that I can see for how we can inject a limited notion of cosmopolitan citizenship into the world as we have it, which would, of course, be a great step forward. So cosmopolitan citizenship would not mean we have a world state and all the individual nation states disappear. What it would mean is that those who administer and design the global rules are strictly impartial between the interests of their own country and compatriots and the interests of other countries and their compatriots. Thank you. Louis.
Thank you, Thomas, for those inspiring and insightful words. My name is Luis Cabrera. I teach at Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm very pleased to join this panel as a co-chair. I'll be keeping the time. We'll ask our speakers to each take precisely 5 minutes. I'll sort of give you the high sign when it's time, and share your thoughts. First up is Sri Ajay Mehta, Seva Mandir, Udaipur.
Thank you. I want to build on some of the remarks made by Professor Poge yesterday when he said that the concentration of wealth and power was coming in the way of benefiting the poor. And he also said that growth itself hadn't benefited the poor. And I think this certainly squares with the experience of India, where we've had growth and perhaps we've also had allocations for poverty alleviation. But if you look at the outcomes, they're very poor. People lack access to education, health, lack of clean water, etc. And overall, there's a sense that people are still suffering from all the dimensions of poverty. What I want to focus on is that look at the sort of bottlenecks at the grassroots level in terms of why, despite the allocation of resources, we are not getting good outcomes. And this, I think, perhaps in my mind also suggests that governments alone, nation states alone are perhaps not best equipped to address this problem. We need a broader kind of coalition of people at the global stage to look at these issues. And to make my point, I would say that India is a very interesting example of how democracy provides opportunities, but the ability to be able to take advantage of these opportunities is central to getting the right outcomes. In the late 70s, there was an inflection point in Indian democracy. There was mass protest on the part of people, and the opposition groups got together to defeat a government that had been going towards authoritarian rule. And under the leadership of Jayaprakash Narayana Gandhian, we got a shift in the paradigm of development, moving away from state-centric arrangements to more people-centric arrangements. The government that came to power didn't last very long, but the message got through to political parties that they had to change their way of business. And for the next 2.5 decades, I would say, government legislated in favor of democratic decentralization, people's participation, partnerships with civil society organizations. Despite having done all this, it was an aborted, I would say, an experiment. And to illustrate what were the constraints, I will now talk a little bit about the experience of one organization that I'm associated with. It's an NGO called Seva Mandir, based in Rajasthan, working with poor tribal communities, no longer remote. Now the infrastructure is not bad. And here, the central point I want to make is while government created policy space for people's participation, legislated democratic decentralization, it was not very good about creating the mechanisms to support an alternative paradigm of development. And in the 80s and 90s, what was very significant was international aid, parts of it were extremely enlightened. And Seva Mandir was a recipient of that kind of enlightened aid. And one of the features of this aid was a long-term vision of what it takes to empower people. There was a certain realization amongst these donors that this is a very slow process, dismantling power structures, reorienting social relations and property relations. And what is interesting is that when Seva Mandir went into this kind of people's participation paradigm of development, it not only encountered external constraints, whereas government, having legislated, was not able to change the mindset of its bureaucracies to actually embody the spirit of an alternative paradigm of development. So we had progressive legislation, but not so progressive bureaucrats managing the kind of transition. But that was not the only constraint. The interesting part of the experience was there were constraints internal to civil society, internal to communities of poor people, where they had now, in a sense, aligned with their patrons and found it difficult to accept the challenge of self-governance or people's participation. To illustrate that, let me just give you 2 examples. In that area, and this would be true for a lot of poor peasant communities, 70% of the land is in the nature of public resources, either vested with past village councils or with forest departments. And we thought that the people would be the best vehicles for managing these resources for improving their livelihoods. But we found that over the years, in complicity with officials and political leaders, they had privatized these, and the ability for them to cooperate with each other had become diluted. Another thing that we discovered was that even as we recruited people from the local communities to provide services like health and education, we found that their performance of duty mirrored that of public servants who were given to absenteeism. Somehow the norms in society were such that once you had a position of authority, you were not obliged to perform your duties. This was not only true of government civil servants, it became true of local community people. And the process of changing this was inevitably a very slow process. And this is where I think international aid, which understood that creating a new paradigm is inherently a slow process. It is a process that requires deep dialogue. It's a process that requires alternatives that do work so that people can shift from their patron-client relationships to more horizontal solidarity. So to maybe conclude, what I would say, if we want the South-South kind of cooperation to work, we need to look at arrangements where we build institutions that are capable of making the shift from state-centric development to people-centric development. These institutions, I would say, have to be autonomous of governments to the extent possible. They need resources, so we need mechanism by which resources are provided to institutions working at the grassroots level who have the ability to change social power and property relationships, change norms. I would say one of the things that Seva Mandir benefited a great deal from was collaboration. I'll just end. Collaboration with scholars abroad from all over the world. We need think tanks in the South and the North to look at what are the grassroots constraints. And above all, we benefited a great deal from idealistic young people, from, again, across borders, to come and work in these villages, Indians as well as foreign nationals. And so I would say that if we really want to remove the bottlenecks on the ground, we have to invest in grassroots institutions. And for that, I think what perhaps has been suggested is we need to include people wherever they are who are interested in the challenge of shifting the paradigm from concentration of wealth to empowering people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Very, very insightful. So next we have Ms. Narayani Ganesh, editor of Speaking Tree here in New Delhi.
Good morning. I edit a newspaper called The Speaking Tree on Sunday, published by the Times of India, and also a column of that name in the main paper on the opinion page. The reason I'm starting by saying this is because why this column was created and why it grew into a Sunday paper and also a website is precisely to take forward the concept of global citizenship and beyond, not stopping just with the globe, but going ahead to the cosmos or universe, because the column itself is not meant to highlight just religion and scriptures and faith, but since the brief is to widen the reader's perspective, necessarily religion, faith, etc. come into play, because these are ancient traditions, modern and contemporary traditions, which talk about a person, an individual or community's outlook, how you see the world, how you see yourself, and how you see your role in society. So the endeavor is to make accessible things which you wouldn't normally go and read. Like, who has the time to go and look into ancient scriptures and find their meaning, etc.? We're too busy to do that, and the inclination is not there. So the aim was to bring these different perspectives to one particular forum and to make it accessible to whoever wished to read and learn from it. Now, interestingly, the chair talked about nepotism and how we need to overcome our tendency to be clannish, to be family-oriented, and in the sense of being giving into nepotism, and the need to reach out to the entire community or world, being impartial, etc. So the whole thing, this whole thing happens when you get trapped in identities. Like when you're in a family, you see yourself as a father or mother or child or whatever, and so you restrict yourself to that, you circumscribe yourself. And so too, when you have a larger role, maybe at your workplace, you're a managing director, you're a peon, whatever, so you see yourself in that prism. So the one way, of course, we're talking about South-South dialogue. I'm just taking it a little bit beyond South-South. Everything, of course, begins locally. We always say at the Times of India that local issues, why are local issues important? Because local issues touch the lives of the local people. It's real for them. And, but on the other hand, several local issues are local issues elsewhere too. They have a global resonance. So a farmer, the problems a farmer faces in India may not be too different in some ways from what a farmer faces in any other part of the world. So what we talk about is bringing the global and local together, and we call it glocal, so that you try and highlight a local issue, but also lend the perspective so that it is transposed to reflect global concerns. And so this is where regional cooperation plays a very important role. Like, countries in a region are all neighbors, as it were. It's like a locality. And so when you bring in greater cooperation between neighbors, then it extends to the greater global family. And I'd like to conclude by saying that we've coined another word called cosmozen instead of citizen. So we talk about being a citizen of the cosmos and not just of your country or of your community or your region. So since time is short, I think I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And may I use that word, cosmos, then?
Of course,
That's a
we'll be
great
very
word.
happy if it gains currency.
And I'm sorry for the very brief, but we're trying to leave time for questions from the audience and get you to your lunch. So next we have Dr. James Arpurathaj of the Institute for Global Policy, and he is New Delhi coordinator of the UNPA campaign.
Chairs, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, the last 2 days, I've been listening to words like technology, aid, growth, and the governments, private sector, but the word people is missing in my understanding. So I think we should need to put people in the center of any debate on South-South cooperation. In South Asia, the two big countries, in the beginning of this century, we started people-to-people dialogue, and that paid a lot of dividends of people-to-people dialogue between Pakistan and India in particular. And when we are outside India, we are all very good friends, except when the cricket match is played. And therefore, I feel that the people-to dialogue should be encouraged in the South Forum as such. To me, when I talk about global citizenship and global fora, UN comes to the mind as the only larger global institution. But right now, UN Security Council is a very undemocratic organization. And of course, there have been a lot of euphoria in India some time back when there was a resolution passed in the UN GA about looking at Security Council reform. Brazil, India, Germany, many of them thought that they can get into it, but there have been several attempts in the past, more than 50 attempts in the UN in the UN General Assembly, and it was defeated. And you need 2/3 of members of the General Assembly to ratify it. And many of these countries have regional associates who don't support them in the claim for the Security Council seat. But what I'm saying is that more than getting into Security Council, we should reform the Security Council, which is undemocratic, with a veto right. And at the UN right now, it is the civil servants and not the elected representatives who represent. So the quote that we, the people of the world, prevents the succeeding generations from the scourge of war is not really true, because it's only the elected representatives. To me, I'm a South Asian, born in Chennai, and I have been associated with the World Federalist Movement because we believed in creating global international institutions like the International Criminal Court. Currently, WFM heads the NGO Coalition for International Criminal Court, and also R2P, Right to Protect Civilians Coalition, because at the UN there is no mechanism to prevent another genocide like Rwanda. And to me, the South-South cooperation also means that we need to strengthen the regional bodies, like the way the European Union is structured. I think if you could have regional bodies in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, it would be good. And also a parliament. So if we have a parliament well functioning in Europe, why not we have it at the global level? Because then only we'll be able to address some of the global problems. And I'm mentioning some of these things. If you want, I can send you the slide later. Because of time, I'm going faster. But UNPA as a concept has been accepted by many countries of the world. And UNPA, in my understanding, United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, could effectively address the issues surrounding the global financial regulatory institutions, climate change, and arms race. I just want to mention about arms race because I was very much involved in the Control Arms campaign, and where we realized that more than 70% of the arms are exported by the members of the Security Council. In fact, it's an underestimation. It could be more, in my opinion. Then how would they bring any international legislation to control, legally binding instrument, control arms? To me, arms are still produced around the world, like how the cars are produced, and it's being sold, and conflicts are created around the world in order that the arms are sold. And I have been living in the last 7 years in Afghanistan. I was a hostage for 2 months in Iraq. Therefore, I know what I'm talking about. We need to stop these conflicts. And the conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and the big force that we have created in terms of ISIL, I don't know how we are going to face that. Regional unification process through the SSC would then promote parliament at the UN. And if people of the world can become world citizens, I think we can dream for harmony, peace, and security. India actually played a very leading role. I wish Manu Bhagawan was here. He has written an excellent book on this, India and Quest for One World. And recently I was with him in New York, and he was explaining how Vijayalakshmi Pandit, those days, was traveling by ship and meeting Mrs. Roosevelt and so many people around the world. And the Nehru-Gandhian era of one world foreign policy, if it could be brought back to India, it will be good. And also we need to embrace democracy, human rights and justice in the SSC Alliance, not just support repressive government. It is not ruled by law, but rule of law. And civil society is also siloed by the nationalist government. I have been working as country director for many of the international NGOs, and I feel that the government funding to NGO sector is growing a lot. With the result, we are all silenced in a way, not to speak or not to do any advocacy work and empowerment. Efforts towards a regional parliament in Asia could generate massive funding for addressing extreme poverty, right to education, and restoring rights to the people. We just have one world, let us preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have the honor of introducing Professor Said Munir Castro.
Respected chair and co-chair, fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Both my previous panelists have given very useful insights on the social aspect, people-to-people context, civil society. Coming from a business school professor, I would take a more pragmatic approach. And the way I intend to do it, quickly wrap up what has been the legacy of one world global civilization, what led to South's evolution, where are we now, what's the way to move forward. It will be a challenge in 5 minutes, but let me say I'll try my best. Now, if you look at the past legacy, two driving forces in South-South, India and China, have had thousands of years of civilization, history, culture. And even if the Silk Road, which has been talked about a lot, did serve as a good platform for cultural exchange, interaction throughout Asia, starting from West and East China, connecting to Mediterranean. That also propelled the growth of Buddhism from India to East Asia. The underlying thing being, there was one world. Moving on, World War II, then we had this new definition of developing economies. And then many countries emerging from the colonial past slowly started challenging the existing order of the day, particularly the economic system. And slowly they have been advocating alternatives to their system, which ultimately led to the emergence of South. Quick look at evolution of South. We have the 45-47, end of Second World War. Most of the countries breaking the shackles of colonialism. Then in 55, we had the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, bringing all the states from, most of the states from Africa and Asia. Then in 64, we had the G77. In 1977, we had the UN set up a South-South unit. Then in the 90s and last 15 years, South-South has been gaining momentum because it is now having a significant influence on the development policy. And also we had two summits in 2006 and 2009, first in Nigeria, then in Venezuela. What is the present context? The way I would like to do it is to give very specific regional, mega-regional, sub-regional initiative that's going on, even as we speak today. Look at the Chinese One Belt, One Road thing, connectivity cooperation across Eurasia. Then we have the ASEAN Free Economic Zone. Then we have the New Development Financial Institution, AIB, and the BRICS. And recently, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal have signed the Motor Vehicle Agreement. So there is a lot of momentum going on, which gives us reason to be cautiously optimistic. Why cautiously optimistic? I'll come to that very quickly. Then we have the South-South Global Asset and Technology Exchange Platform, which is both physical and web-based interface for inclusive growth. What are the challenges? First and foremost, I will take on where my two previous panelists left. The citizens of this region have to own. If there is no sense of ownership to this concept, it will fall flat. How do we do that? Raise more awareness, advocacy in terms of what exactly South-South cooperation means, what value addition it proposes, and to do that, we need an enabling environment. That brings me to the second capsule, that is systematic approach. We have been talking, which is part of the process, but what is also important, at some point, we build a development strategy which also finds reflection in our national development plans. Both have to move in tandem, otherwise there is a risk they will get disconnected, and we will end up some of the concern that maybe growth, maybe development, but people at the lower spectrum will still be left behind. And one of the way of doing it is also to promote the centers of excellence. In India, we have TERI. In China, we have the Poverty Reduction Center. So there are a lot of world-class institutions out there. We need to integrate the resources, and more importantly, South has to find a way to global marketplace, because if you don't have the economic power, these wishful thinkings will remain as thinking. And last but not the least, people-to-people contact. And the best way to do tourism, because it's easy, it's cheap, it's faster, it generates revenue, and even now, 8% of global jobs are in tourism sector. More than 50% of the employees in tourism sector are women. More than 50% of people of age below the age of 25. So this is something on a pragmatic level we can come together down there as one of the means to achieve one world global citizenship. Last, a very simplified model, we call it COLD model. Connect, organize, learn, develop. How do we connect? One of the advantages South-South has, which North-South didn't have, we live in a time where social media, e-platform is giving us ample opportunity, I'll be done very shortly, to interface in a scale manner at a much cheaper rate than that was inconceivable even 10 years ago. So we have to take advantage of that. Then organize, bring the system in line so that international best practices become part of the living in South. And also conduct planning to promote tourism, which I already mentioned, and people-to-people contact for cultural exchange. Learn, which is very important. Ultimately provide a global platform for services in key sectors, health, education, access to finance. That is something where South has done well, whether Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, BRAC NGO, or solar panel renewable energy, there is much to share and grow. Last, develop. I would suggest to frugal engineering, make commodities which are functional, cheaper to people in this part of the world, so that there is sharing of common prosperity. And last is a more efficient architecture of multilateral support. So that, I hope, in 5 minutes captures some of the pragmatic way I am looking forward, moving forward with this concept so that it doesn't remain only confined in the room of think tank talks, it has more real life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. You can always trust a business professor to bring us to reality. Now I have the honor of introducing Mr. Chandrachur Singh from the University of Birmingham, who is also an associate professor of political science at Hindu College, University of Delhi.
Professor Pogge, Dr. Cabrera, Professor Chaturvedi, esteemed panelists and friends. It's an honor and a privilege indeed to stand before you and speak few words. I must first express my gratitude to Professor Pogge because I draw from his writings, try to extend it maybe if I succeed, and Dr. Cabrera for enabling me to do what I'm doing. My understanding of global citizenship is more concerned with the idea of creating an awareness that about the wider world in which individuals have a role as bearer of rights, irrespective of his or her identity claims. It's an attempt to ensure that the world is free of socially unjust practices, and, very importantly, making the world more equitable and a sustainable place. Now, this is the theory of citizenship, global citizenship, and perhaps on a theoretical plank, cosmopolitanism as an idea looks prepared to pursue it or to push it further. That being said, there are different approaches, there are different strategies through which it has been sought to be done. I cannot go in details in all of them, but broadly, if I am able to summarize them under 3 subheads. The first one is what I call the empathy approach, taken by people like Martha Nussbaum, Dr. Cabrera himself, where the idea is to make people empathetic by Nussbaum would say, educating people. Cabrera says, what is qualitative political theory? You go and learn about the experiences of the other and then build on that. I mean, these are fantastic ways of doing it, but then there are problems, and I'm not going to go into the problems because that would, take my time away from what I want to say. The second approach is Professor Pogge, who tries to theorize on why we should avoid doing harms to others. We have people like Shapecourt and Linklater. They've all talked about different ways through which and why we should avoid harms, and in doing so, how we should promote rights of the others. It's a fantastic idea, but the only problem that, Professor Pogge himself would say that, we need to create institutions, establish them, and reform them in order to pursue our own goals. My only limited understanding of this is, how do we expect the same people to transform and reform those institutions by which they're themselves gaining? So therefore, that pushes me further to my third approach, which is what I call emphasizing on the cosmopolitan overlaps, in a way which is also now being made more popular through a new phrase which is called rooted cosmopolitanism, which does not see the state and the larger objectives as binaries, rather focuses on achieving larger goals through the state. The people like Appia, Tony Erskine, but I draw on the works of Lee Yepes, and trying to argue that the state as an institution could promote cosmopolitan virtues or cosmopolitan values. There are different ways through which it could be done. Yepes believes that we could need to create what he calls avant-garde agencies, which is a combination of activists and theoreticians informing each other and intervening in social practices. Interestingly, if you combine the two, the theorists and the practitioners, you'll get to what Gramsci would say. A perfect example of that would be Mahatma Gandhi, because he combines in himself the role of a theoretician as well as a practitioner. Now, if we could, I hope we have time, if we could somehow have Gandhis, I'm not saying Gandhi would be able to reach across all the people in the world, but I'm sure there are Gandhis, different Gandhis in different states. So there could be Pablo Nerudas, there could be Mandelas, there could be Martin Luther Kings. Every continent, every sub-region has those people. And if through them, through their ideas, the local people could be sensitized, then perhaps the state governments would have a better flexibility on taking stance on internationally contentious issues. My whole work is on climate change, and I find that today India is becoming more flexible in terms of the stance that it needs to take and it has been taking. So perhaps that is where I would conclude. My understanding is that rooted cosmopolitanism through national icons is the way to move forward, in which the states remain as they are, they continue to function as they are, as they do, still the people themselves become motivated to pursue those claims. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. Okay, as you can see, we have an eminent and learned panel. This will be a very exciting question session. We have about 20 minutes for your questions. If I could ask you to keep them as brief as possible, because we'd like everyone to have a chance to speak if they would like to. So please, who'd like the first question?
Thank you. Is this on? Hi, I'm Urvashi Aneja. I'm at the Jindal School of International Affairs and also at Observer Research Foundation. We heard yesterday about inequality and how 62 people control. I'm not going to go into the statistics because I don't want to misquote Thomas Pogge, but I was just wondering whether the panel could comment on this new kind of philanthropic initiatives we see from the corporate sector. I mean, some would call it philanthrocapitalism or venture capitalism. So you have the Bill Gates and Melinda BMGF, you have Mark Zuckerberg. So you have some of these people who are in that top 1% who are now creating foundations to give back, et cetera, et cetera. So does this fit with our idea of one citizenship, global citizenship, or is this promoting a more market-oriented form of development? And I think that ties into maybe Chandrachur's your point that how can the rules change with the people who are making the change also have a vested interest in keeping things in a certain status quo? So we know, for an example, that BMGF also invests in a number of companies that perhaps have interests that are contradictory to equitable development outcomes.
thank
So
you.
just
Thank you very much.
be quiet.
Chandra?
Thanks.
Well, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I really didn't get what you said there, but what I do understand is it's the people who would change. And how do you change the people? That's what my point was. You have to get them motivated. How do they get motivated? They would not get motivated by larger jargons. They have to be motivated through their local roots. You know, for example, just to give you an example, if somebody comes to me and tells me that, look, I must follow my human rights, an external agency comes and tells me, perhaps I may, listen to that, may do that, but if my own parents tell me, perhaps I'll be more motivated in doing that. So that's where my point lies. If we have to rub in those points in civilizations, in traditions, perhaps that is one way through which people get motivated to do things. After all, you have people who have committed their entire life to doing service for the people of the community.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Arpurathaj?
Yeah. Corporate social responsibility is absolutely important in my opinion. At the same time, they only address one part of the needs satisfaction. If you look at Convention of the Rights of the Child, we have survival rights, development rights, participation and protection rights. But whereas advocacy, many of the corporate social CSR may not support some of the policy in terms of influencing policies and things of that kind. But then their work in terms of survival rights of children and development of women groups and self-help groups are absolutely important, because the problem in terms of eradication of absolute poverty and malnutrition is much greater.
Thank you very much. We've got lots of questions. We'll take two together here. So, Professor and Sir.
Good morning, people. My name is Rasigan Raj from South Africa. So So if you'll allow me just to continue with the question itself. We all recognize that we have common origins, and our subsequent diversification and spread around the planet has enabled us to develop systems which are kind of appropriate to where we are located. Within that context itself, it's also made us more prone, especially to crises and contemporary, I would say, a threat of existence. In this context, much of world history about collective agency or organizations coming together to work collectively towards common goals have been through civil society organizations. I could use, for example, international trade union federations, etc. How do the panelists see this in the current context as being important? If it's at all important, what are the lessons that we can draw from? And why were these initiatives unable to succeed 30 to 40 years ago?
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one more question. Sir, here. Actually, sorry, he, in the yellow tie, the gentleman had the question.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your very interesting presentations. My name is Naveed Hanif. I work for the UN, and I'm really surprised none of you mentioned the 2030 agenda, for which we have worked for 2 years. And let me ask 2 questions. You know, the 2030 agenda on sustainable development with 17 goals, 169 targets, is about no one left behind. And not a single speaker mentioned it. I am really appalled by our performance as UN. We have not been able to convince you. My first question is, one world, one citizen, is it a choice anymore? Or it's you just can't avoid it? The interdependence is so deep, you have no choice. So I want your comment, is this a choice or you have to just do it? Second observation, and this is a question to Professor Singh, changing the mindset and behavior modification. Human behavior is determined by the consequences of their actions. If you know this climate change will sink all of us, you will modify your behavior. So if you could tell me, what are the incentives or disincentives? Because mindset will change institutions, that will change policies. Could you tell me what is there to use to nudge people to change their mindsets? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the first gentleman's question. Who would like to take that? Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Mr. Minta?
On the question of, collective agency and civil society not succeeding, I think sometimes we have oversold ourselves. We have claimed outcomes for which we are not quite ready. And I think if we were to sort of identify what are the true bottlenecks to benefiting the poor, empowering them, and then draw attention to that long-drawn process of making that happen, I think there would be greater success, and that has implications for an alternative kind of politics.
Actually, some years back they were talking about think globally and act locally, but after a little later they said think globally, act locally, nationally and also internationally. Because many of the global policies are affecting the people, everyday life, I mean, including us. And if you look at the farmers committing suicide is because of climate change, genetically modified seeds, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we need to be aware about the global policies and tackle them at the level at which it occurs. It's a kind of a federalist subsidiarity policy that we need to follow.
Mr. Singh, would you like to respond?
Thank you for your question. In the context of climate change, as you know, the problems are not because if the impacts of the climate change were even, then perhaps the solution would have come. And it is precisely this uneven impact which gets the nation into deadlocks. And then you have claims and counterclaims, historical responsibilities, capabilities, development, and so on and so forth. I would name 4 countries which are very, very important for any solution on climate change. India, China, United States, and there are more. Australia could be one. Now, these countries definitely need to come on board. And to come on board, the flexibilities have to be there. Now, one reason why countries do not come on board is perhaps because of the disconnect of our democratic politics in which governments think that if they do something which is good, perhaps the people may take it as bad, because that may result in perhaps surrendering some of those so-called interests. And that is where these ideas, if you have those ideas through which people themselves could be convinced, then perhaps democratic governments would be more flexible in taking them up and resolving them. I'm saying this because for the last 30 years, and if you look into the protocols and the frameworks and the institutions, there are around 6,000 protocols, framework, institutions governing climate change. And the carbon emissions have been doubling. Even if we stop all emissions today, the impacts are already there. And see, one good example of that is United States spends $100 billion to erect seawalls. Unfortunately, Bangladesh's entire budget is not more than 18 or 20 billion dollars. So that is the disconnect, and that is where individuals can play a very important role, and that's why I frame it under cosmopolitanism.
All right, thank you very much. I'm aware that we have 10 minutes, and we're going to be standing between you and your lunch, so I'll take 3 last questions and then encourage you to speak to the colleagues. So this gentleman's been very patient. Ma'am, if we would let you, and in the yes. So those will be our 3. So this gentleman first. No, in the...
Hello. Yeah, my name is Shailendra. I come from Institute of Rural Management, Anand, Gujarat. Yeah, because while we have been debating this whole issue of South-South cooperation, and also including many of the contradictions or challenges which come up within even this South-South cooperation itself, like what is the right approach for bringing people from South-South together? Can it be the market, the development-oriented approach? So now we have this interesting theme over and above that, one word, global citizenship. It's an interesting session under this. So of course my question straight away is that yeah, even as a nation in India, so of course these days we have been debating a lot on nationalism. How do we identify ourselves with the nation? All this, a lot of debate is going on. So several issues, several things that come in the way, even at that level. So we have the language, the regions, the caste, several things coming in the way, even at the national level. So now we are talking of another identity at the global level, citizenship. Somebody said cosmopolitan citizenship, limited cosmopolitan citizenship. So what can be the basis of this citizenship? On what basis can we bring the citizenship, make them identify themselves at that global level? Can that be, say, so some of these primordial loyalties or characteristics, or certain common characteristics, be it, say, developmental goal, we all work towards developmental goal, justice, equity, or as even leftists or Marx would say, yes, it will be the class interest which can bring in this, this solidarity or even internationalism. So what can be the basis on which we work towards this global citizenship? That's
Thank you very much. We have...
My question is for Professor Poge, that as the gentleman there said, of course it's not a choice, but at the same time, how do you work for the one world, one citizenship, when we are seeing a resurgence across the world of multiple conflicting identities, not just religion-based? And so my question to you is that, is it a cycle? Because we know, I have German friends who can't believe what is happening there, when they thought that such energies would not resurface for at least a century after the war and the Holocaust. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the tensions in India. So, are we in a cyclical phenomenon, or is this an inevitable and long, is this conflict and this dynamic, this kind of almost like a dialectic, intrinsic to our civilizational journey? In which case, then we simply have to learn to work for ways in which we can still keep asserting the one world, one citizenship idea.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have our last question in the back.
Yeah, my name is Supriya Roy Chaudhary, and I work for an organization called Crisis Action. I'll keep this short. My question is to Dr. Puthuraj. In the specific context of protection of civilians from armed conflict, what opportunities do you see for South-South cooperation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Kasru?
Respond to, thank you. I would respond to the question raised by the gentleman in the first. I think you have questioned the feasibility of this global platform, and you have cited India's complexity. I think your first premises is an answer in itself. What I would caution is an oversimplification of a complex process. if we are talking about a time where there is functional democracies, look at what's happening to EU. Look at the Brexit problem. So it would be very unwise to expect or even dream of one single identity. In my opinion, cultures, civilizations have been there for centuries. Respecting that land, we have to find a common platform where we interface, exchange, and we grow, whether it's tourism, and end of the day, there has to be some economic returns. People will not be just motivated to be culturally aligned if they don't see any certain degree of improvement in the quality of life by these exchanges. So both have to move in tandem. And I would be very cautious in terms of trying to draw some degree of monolithic structure whereby it fits all. It doesn't. It hasn't fit in European Union, it hasn't fit in NAFTA. It, in my opinion, is highly unrealistic probability. I hope it answers that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thomas?
Yeah, so I wasn't very clear apparently in my remarks. So there is an important clue that I want to emphasize again because it's really, I think, a very promising idea. So think about nepotism again, right? If somebody comes to you and says, if you had to choose between your own daughter and your country, what would you choose? This would be a horrible choice, but most people would say, I would choose my daughter. And so what I'm trying to do is transcend that dichotomy where you say we have to balance these two things, what is more important and so on. So my move is to say, in appeal to nepotism, this anti-nepotism principle, which is already very well introduced, is to say, don't see it as a binary choice, as a kind of how much weight do I give to my daughter, how much weight do I give to my country, but see it as a limit in the scope. So where do I benefit my daughter, and where is it inappropriate to benefit my daughter? If you are the headmistress of the school and your daughter goes to that school, you cannot do anything at all to change her grades or to influence the biology teacher in terms of what that teacher might give her as a grade or anything like that. The slightest thing, right? The entire interest of your daughter gets zero weight, but only in that context. And that's what I want globally. I want to say, when I am the president of the World Bank, as president of the World Bank, I have to be completely impartial, and the fact that I happen to be from the US or from Burma or God knows where doesn't matter at all. I have to completely forget it. And then outside of that role, after I retire from the World Bank or in my after hours or whatever, I can love my country like any good patriot would. So I want to defang, so to speak, the conflict that you rightly see, you know, all these people with their identities and so on. Let them have their identities, but let them recognize that there is a limit, there is a space in which these identities have to be left like shoes when you enter the mosque.
In my opinion, we are already world citizens, whether we like it or not, and thanks to the internet, whether it is Oscar show or Bollywood or whatever it is, we get to know immediately. But at the same time, we should also look at global problems and try to, if we cannot influence ourselves, join others who are doing it through website and other means. And some of the global international instruments like the International Criminal Court, ICC, R2P, and all that, was created by international NGOs and South-South cooperation. I would say I would credit that to South-South cooperation, especially on the arms trade. The lady asked the question. In Bamako in 2001, there was a big conference where the African countries came together and said that most of the conflicts in Africa, except in two countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea at that point of time, were all non-states acting as a state. And how do these arms come in? There is Geneva Convention prohibiting it. Then we realized that globally there is no legally binding instrument on arms trade because there is a monopoly of the Security Council and many people in this region as well are exporting arms. So therefore, a group joined called as International Action Network Against Small Arms. And then finally what resulted was an arms trade treaty which was approved by the General Assembly of the UN. So it was a NGO, civil society initiative where South-South cooperation was very evident. So therefore what I would say is, besides these international treaties, in our region, I think we need to be united. I mean, I would like to say that I'm an Indian, I'm a South Asian, so South Asia is very important. Similarly, in Asia, It's the only region which doesn't have a regional cooperation. If you look at Africa Union, at least they are able to resolve the conflicts within the region. But in Asia, no. Therefore, we should go for that. And lastly, we have to stop militarization. I'm sorry, gentlemen. So much of military budget is spent when we are not able to focus on education. Do you think our people of this region really want Mirage and F-16? No. You would take a referendum, they'll say no. We need education, investment in education and health.
Just by way of concluding remarks, talking about South-South cooperation, he talked about education. So one of the most wonderful ways by which one can bring the countries of the South together is, for instance, there's a conflict situation in Ayodhya. Somebody wants a temple, somebody wants a mosque. So why not turn that place into a South university, you know, where you can have all kinds of studies, I mean, whether it's science or engineering or religion or whatever, so that people of the same region can come together and study whatever they want and share their knowledge. I think knowledge sharing is something that can bring the region together. Whatever you share by way of ancient or modern knowledge or technology, I think that's a great way to forge ties among people of the region. And similarly, coming to conflict, at Siachen, there's always been a move by a lot of civil society agencies to start a biodiversity park there instead of parking the army from both sides, so that it's open to people. I know it sounds a little not doable, but then the idea is there. It's all these ideas about global citizenship, etc., is notional. But the thing is that to take it from that prism rather than, very narrow viewpoints.
Thank you very much. And it's to me to give the closing remarks. I'd like to leave you with thoughts about two ways to think about global citizenship. The first is from Mahatma Gandhi. The second is from Pandit Nehru. So Gandhi tells us that we should think of the world as a single community. And what he's giving us there is a moral conception of global citizenship, a spiritual conception. He's saying there's something that ties all of us together in the world, all 7 billion of us, as a species, as a set of human beings, and we all have commitments to each other that we should try to honor as best we can. So it's a spiritual way, a way of seeing other human beings, regardless of their nationality, regardless of any other markers they might carry with them. Pandit Nehru gives us an institutional version of cosmopolitanism. In the 1940s, it was actually very popular to think about world federalism, world government, especially after August 6, 1945, which is when the United States dropped the first nuclear bomb, and suddenly everyone in the world felt like they could be threatened all at the same time. It focused many people's minds. So Jawaharlal Nehru had an audience with activists on world federalism, and he came to think that it mightn't be the worst idea in the world. In fact, he'd been thinking of it before. He wrote a letter to his daughter saying it might not be the worst idea in the world. But here, and I think he gives us a lesson for moving forward, he said, but it's going to be difficult for the United States and the other powerful states to accept the idea of global democracy, in part because, more than 1 in every 7 people in the world is Indian. That gives a pretty good voting bloc. So I think we can think of that as we move forward, because often there's resistance, and rightly so, I would say, to the idea of people from America or people from Europe coming again and saying, let's impose a structure on the world. But I think if we think of it the way Mr. Nehru thought of it, it would actually be a way, possibly, if it could ever happen, of giving people in South Asia more voice, of giving people in the rest of Asia more voice, because we've got the numbers here, and that's